Yes, I say we're joined by Mark McSherry from Fianna Fáil, by Niamh Lyons and by David Davenport. Maybe, David, I might start with you just in terms of the procedure now. It's a new Dáil, the first week of a new Dáil, but it's the old rules, is that right, apply for the operation of sessions like Leaders' Questions?
That's right. Three people quizzing Tánaiste Francis Fitzgerald this morning. Fianna Fáil's Micheál Martin, Sinn Féin, Jerry Adams, we presume, and Joan Burton from Labour, who's kind of... You had to look twice at the television yesterday when she was quizzing Francis Fitzgerald in the first Leaders' Questions. There she is, firmly in opposition now for however long she remains as party leader. But they are the arrangements, but they are due to change very soon indeed, because I think the last meeting of the Dáil Reform Committee that will bring in new rules, there may see more than one technical group indeed. They're due to sign off on those today. So in a couple of weeks' time, we'll have a completely different format.
Mark, would Fianna Fáil be keen to see a new way of dealing with this?
Well, absolutely. As you know, Micheál Martin was the first to call on the Monday after the election that we should proceed to ensure that there was adequate reforms and that government would be more subservient to Parliament rather than the other way around, which is always the way we had it. So we hope that those reforms will...
certainly we're discovering what government being subservient to Parliament might well mean, Niamh,
yes.
Isn't that right? Yeah, and just, Mark McSherry, in terms of where we are in the context of this new politics, we now have Fianna Fáil in opposition proposing an important piece of legislation with potentially very significant implications for good or ill. The government, the Minister of Finance, says this is a bad idea, I don't want to do it. But he'll have to do it, presumably, because of the Dáil arithmetic. And he'll have to go to Europe, will he, and try and persuade Europe to allow the Irish government and then he'll have to come back and be accountable to the Dáil for implementing a piece of legislation that he doesn't agree with. Is that where we are now?
Well, I mean, that's what happens in other countries, in effect, is that Parliament takes a view on legislation. And I mean, what Niamh was saying about, perhaps Fianna Fáil could be conciliatory and let the AG look at it. I mean, the AG looks at all legislation, I would imagine. And committee stage of legislation is there for that very purpose, to work through it stage by stage. And of course, we're open to improvements on it. But as I said yesterday in the debate on this myself, I mean, what's been missing for the last 70 years is that we need to put the people central to legislation like this. And while Philip Blaine may not feel he needs these powers, the people require them. And ultimately, Parliament have the opportunity tonight to bestow those powers on him to ensure that the people get fair treatment by our banks.
But just on this point, the politics of this, we have a Minister of Finance now who will have to pick up a piece of legislation which he disagrees with fundamentally, and he'll have to pursue the implementation of that, as I say, in Europe, be accountable to the Dáil for its implementation, take responsibility for something he effectively has argued is irresponsible.
Well, I suppose that's what real democracy is about. I mean, the idea of one person in a dictatorial figure as head of a department making all the balls is something that we've become used to, and it was the practice in this country. But it wasn't as democratic as it ought to have been. So I think that's the essence of new politics.
I'm wondering, I mean, how tenable is Michael Noonan's? This is just the first, presumably, of a series of examples we
I'm sure
how tenable is his position as a minister when he has to pursue something which he believes is just wrong?
Well, what I'd say is no minister has exclusivity on what's correct. And I think that there's 158 people elected to Dáil Éireann, and new politics is about whatever minister, regardless of what his personal opinions or her personal opinions may be, is to embrace that and carry out the will of Parliament.
So,
Niamh? One of the things...
Yeah. But what about that point, maybe, Mark McSherry, that if this new politics is to work, it needs a new kind of approach. So rather than thinking in terms of one party or side having a victory at the expense of another, actually you need to sit down and thrash these things out before it gets to the kind of megaphone diplomacy we saw in the last 24 hours.
With respect, it's the media that are suggesting the trial. We're not doing that. As I said, committee stage is there. We have our proposal. We think it's a good one. A committee stage is there for people to participate in, including the minister, to improve it if he sees fit. So, of course, we're open to that. It's not just about a win this evening. It's about putting the people centre in the terms of putting legislation together in the future. And acknowledging that, as I said, no minister has exclusivity on being correct, and there's an onus on him to listen to all the representatives.
I would have thought the most important thing coming out, Mark McSherry, from a commission of inquiry that's asked to make recommendations is the recommendations, first and foremost, that they are implemented, that lessons are learned, and maybe that's where the focus might most usefully be.
Certainly with the debate next week, I'd imagine that we're going to get into that a lot more detail. That is the most important stuff. But we can't get away from the fact that we have the Commission report, we have the word of the Commissioner, and we have these whether they're selectively leaked transcripts, illegally leaked transcripts, and there does need to be some kind of reconciliation on that, because public confidence in the police force can only be secured if questions are answered in this regard, and also that the recommendations from the Commission itself and the improvements that are needed as a result of that, come into being.
David, did the Minister?
Well, absolutely, that is the case. But there seems to be some conflicting reports now on whether it was adversarial or inquisitorial in this instance. And I think in the ideal world, private deliberations are best kept in private, and they feed into a report. But none of us created this problem, and it has to be dealt with now. And I'm sure it's uncomfortable for the Minister, as much as the rest of us would like to move on and deal with the implementation of the recommendations of the Commission.
If you pick up the ball and run with it, then you give encouragement in future circumstances for people to start leaking transcripts of what are supposed to be private exchanges, and the credibility of the whole process is damaged.
Well, definitely. To my mind, it is illegal to leak these sorts of transcripts, and it isn't ideal, but it has happened, and unfortunately, or fortunately, it's brought information now into the public domain that requires reconciliation. So, the Minister...
Your leader has decided to make an issue of this. He's been raising questions about it, I think, for a number of days. He could just as easily choose to leave the sleeping dog lie.
Well, sometimes people prefer to pursue different things, but it would be an abdication of his responsibility as leader of the opposition not to seek reconciliation of these issues.
Yeah, I suppose.
What does Fianna Fáil want?
Well, I think first of all, on Niall Collins, he brought a lot of these matters to the forefront in the public domain in the first place. Niall's position has said that, look, we must take the Commissioners at her word, and that's reasonable, and that is the position. But equally, as things developed over the last 24, 48 hours, we've had these further leaks, and while we all would desire to draw a line under the sand, get on with the implementation of the recommendations, we do have a responsibility to try and reconcile this with these matters.
I suppose the other effect of all this is that in the weeks ahead, but there we'll leave it. Thanks to Niamh Lyons, political editor of the Times Ireland edition, to RT's political correspondent David Davenport, and to Fianna Fáil TD Mark McSharry. Appreciate you being with us this morning. That's